Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this session. I want to remind you that following the session, please respond to the feedback directly in the app, and you can get a free AWS swag item from the info desk. And also, if you would want the deck items, you can scan your badge right at the front here, and you can get those immediately. At this time, I would like to welcome to the stage Raymond from Veeam, presenting on cloud data management with Veeam and AWS.
Thank you. Hi, a very good cooling afternoon for everyone. And pardon me for my voice, has been under the weather for some time. I'm going to talk a lot more interesting information that we've gathered. All right, definitely the content I'm going to share is not hazy. It's a combination of some trends. It's a combination of some feedback that we gather. At the same time, use cases. So before I start off talking about that overall holistic view of cloud data management with Veeam together with AWS, obviously. I do have a small announcement for all of you guys. It's always rewarding to be attending presentation session, right? You guys should have a piece of paper, obviously, that has the Veeam logo. I will be giving out 2 passwords, all right? 2 kind of code word in between my presentation and the end of my presentation, and you just have to write down the combination of that so-called 2-way multi-factor authentication, that 2 code word that sums up the overall password in this piece of paper, and you can go to our booth downstairs to exchange for a highly valued mystery gift. All right, so rewarding, obviously, and then pay attention to the code word, all right? You will be given at the middle of the session as well as at the end of the session, all right? So let's get things started. So what we're going to discuss about when it comes to going to the cloud and what is so important on the data piece of things, as well as how do you manage and control the data, all right? So just a bit of a brief of Veeam history. We have been around for quite some time, since 2008, protecting virtual workloads. As you know, during then, virtualization first strategy, everyone is going into the modern data centers and so on. So virtualizing your workload seems to be the main projects of focus. As you move along, midway through in the Veeam history, 2012, private cloud environment was still predominantly, and it goes into the era of virtualization becomes a commodity. It doesn't matter what infrastructure, virtual infrastructure that you're using, as long as you're on the virtualization. Workloads are mobile and agile in that sense, still within the on-prem. And as we know right now, moving forward, 2019, all the way, the next 3 to 5 years or even 10 years, cloud, multi-cloud strategy. Everyone should have a notion of moving into the cloud, or at least a strategy that moves into the cloud. We have statistics to prove that if you're not into that discussion, if you're not into strategizing your workloads to be in the multi-cloud environment, definitely there's something to think about. All right, so yep, we do have the number of customers that we have in Veeam. In actual fact, the number of customers that we're having right now is increasing at 4,000 to 5,000 per month, 350,000 customers. Thanks for that support from our customers. And I want to stress on the Net Promoter Score. In actual fact, we have increased that to 75 this year. The latest results. Net Promoter Score, NPS scoring, is a standard whereby our customers will recommend our solution to the other customers. Word of mouth recommendation, as well as satisfaction level of using our product end-to-end deployment, right up to support and so on, after sales support. All right, so that is kind of slightly more than a decade of our data protection journey, moving forward into cloud. And let's go into some technical use cases, kind of in these 3 pillars of focus over here. Firstly, cloud data retention. There is always this concern about costing, obviously. At the same time, concern about the capacity growing. The capacity is growing at a huge range, 50 to more than 50% of your data growth year over year. Some organization faces even more. And with the growth in your production data, the backup data is also increasing. And the backup data is increasing a lot more than your production data. Why? Because you got to keep multiple versions and you got to keep a longer retention. So it can be multiple folds higher than your production data. All right, so it does impact, and it's impacting it a lot more. And obviously that the choice of storing the data in the most affordable cloud storage will be one of the key reasons of moving into the cloud. And obviously, one of the highest adoption of getting into the cloud, and the easiest way to get into the cloud will be these particular capabilities of moving your backup data into a very affordable long-term retention cloud storage, Amazon S3, with infrequent access as part of the object storage to use. And in Veeam, we call it the Cloud Tier. So it's a form of tiering the data of your backup into the most affordable storage. At the same time, one important factor over here, it doesn't compensate on your recovery. It doesn't compensate on your overall backup data methodology and management side. All right, we're going to talk about that. We're going to have a couple of use cases to support that. Second, cloud mobility. Talking to a lot of customers who are moving into the cloud, as that general term is, right? Moving to the cloud, or a more technical term, migrating into the cloud. We do understand migrating into the cloud takes more than just pushing your workloads from on-prem into the cloud. There's planning at the beginning, the workloads and the sizing and so on, right? So there are partners who are very well versed in that. You can engage them in doing the planning. From a Veeam perspective, what is the tools that can help you move into the cloud, or what we call Veeam Cloud Mobility, right? Being mobile, moving into the cloud for your on-prem workloads, and in a wizard-driven step, provisioning on the fly, transforming whatever that's on-prem, which is of a different format, into the rightful format that you can run in the AWS environment. Right, so seamless migration across, or what I call direct restore to AWS, migrating from your on-prem workloads into the cloud. And of course, from then on, protecting the cloud as what you mentioned as part of the third pillar, AWS data protection. After I move my data into the cloud, what should I do? All right, so we do have solutions into continuing the protection when your workload is in the cloud, mitigating the risk. And from a solution standpoint, as you can see over here, through our Veeam dedicated agents for AWS, through our flagship products of Veeam backup and replication for VMware on AWS. We'll talk about how is that collaboration with VMware on AWS with your on-prem VMware environment and so on. All right, so these are the three kind of solution sets that you can embark in getting your strategy into the cloud. The assurance and your confidence level of moving the cloud without the loss of your data, without the loss of your availability when you're accessing data. All right, so let's take a look at Veeam backup and replication, VMware, or VMware Cloud Foundation in the AWS. So for customers who are in the VMware environment on-prem right now, this is something that you can look into from a solution standpoint. So firstly, a couple of things to provide. It has to be flexible and easily integrated solution into that VMware piece in the AWS, or VMware Cloud Foundation into AWS. And that is one seamless way of you kind of integrating and reaching out into the cloud. Whatever they have on-prem on VMware environment, easily and seamlessly move it into the cloud with the same virtualization platform, the same manageability of the workloads from a VMware perspective, but then now is in the public cloud environment. So what you can do is, obviously, with the solution that we have, using that as a form of backup, using that as a form of restoration into the VMware on the cloud environment, managing a bigger islands is still one single island of on-prem VMware environment with AWS, VMware on AWS is still one single management of an island and moving the workloads around. When we spoke about cloud mobility earlier on as one of the solutions, that this is something that will be interesting to migrate the data out seamlessly, right? So maintaining the cloud, when we talk about cloud up and probably bi-directional way, cloud mobility is about how you can move the data and workloads to where you want. So in any situation, if you decide, okay, I'm thinking of moving the workloads back on-prem into my VMware environment, you can do that seamlessly in this situation, right? So that kind of extend the overall boundaries of your workloads agility, all right, in a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environment. So ideal for large enterprises and commercial sectors, ideal for large enterprises in the commercial as well as in the public sector, thinking about AWS Cloud Foundation into powered at the back end by the Veeam solution from a replication standpoint, from a data protection standpoint. All right, so that's all our Veeam Availability Suite support for VMware Cloud on AWS. So what are the kind of features that we have over there? We talk about data protection, right? Drilling down into some of the capabilities on what we have in protecting, mainly, of course, the core of backup and restore. As simple as what you back up on-prem, you can restore it across. Granular recovery is not just about a whole workload's failure. It's not just about disaster recovery into AWS, which can be done. Of course, that's part of the backup and replication capabilities that we do. It's also about granular restoration, okay? Restoring the type of data that you need. So file level recovery, file level restore, with the capabilities of choosing what you want to restore appropriately into the AWS on VMware side. Veeam Explorer, this is also one of the key capabilities of doing restoration. When it comes to Explorer, take for example, if you have databases whereby you want to go more granular into restoring a particular databases, you want to restore a particular emails, all right? So application item kind of recovery, more than just file level recovery, are also part of the capabilities that we can provide using our Veeam Explorer. To a certain extent, doing e-discovery of what you have, parts of the emails that you want to do restoration, parts of the databases you want to do restoration, and restore it into the VMware environment in AWS. All right? Backup copy job. This particular capability stretched from if you want to build a multi-tenancy within organization, multi-tenancy, different departments will have different usage of the data that's pushing on into the cloud. You can use our backup copy data. Certain departments will have their specific kind of segregated backup storage that they are using, and they have the ability to do their own restoration. All right, so user-initiated restoration from the different departments holder, different departments and application owner. At the same time, the overall admin will be able to manage a holistic view of how the backup operation goes, setting the regulation and the policies, but leaving and delegating that restore capabilities to each of the department or the application owner. All right, and talking about replication, this is also one unique point on Veeam to be able to provide that seamless replication. When we talk about replication, it's different from recovery. Replication is more for, in the form, disaster recovery. At the same time, it's also one of the fastest way to get your replica, which is now in VMware on AWS, to be up and running. It's as fast as powering on the virtual machine on the VMware on AWS. So when a virtual machine is down, you just have to initiate a failover. You just power on all the virtual machines that you need over there, which is pretty seamless and pretty fast. So that is compliance into your disaster recovery planning. That's compliance into your business continuity planning. All right, backing up to tape through an alternative of AWS storage gateway. There's also one form of pushing your data if you want to use the VTL, virtual tape library, through a gateway into the AWS. Again, that long-term storing of your data. Encryption, obviously it has to come with encryption. 256 AES encryption, whereby your data is fully encrypted. You will not have to be worried about data being compromised and so on through encryption. So that's kind of Veeam on VMware Cloud on AWS as part of the solution if you're thinking about pushing, utilizing the same kind of virtual platform that you have on-prem into AWS. So from a diagram perspective to depict, so you can see on your left side over here, all right? So the VMware cloud environment that you're having. So we have a couple of components inside there. The one right in the middle, as you can see, will be the Veeam backup server. So that will be the central management of the backup, replication, restoration, all centrally managed over there. At the same time, there will be a proxy. Our proxy components are basically what we call a data mover. Data movers are focused on getting the chunk of data that you have that's running on basically the virtual machine workloads that you are seeing over there to be pushed out into a backup repository on your right-hand side over here, which is into the VMware Linux repository. So you can treat the repository as a storage area that's residing in the workloads or the storage on AWS, pushing all the backup into the VMware Cloud on AWS. So everything is stored within the AWS environment in that sense. Okay, so pushing out from a VMware Cloud workloads, production workloads, into the usual standard AWS kind of storage and so on, or EBS. All right, and the other way around, not exactly the other way around, the replication side, the DR side that we spoke about, you can have your VMware Cloud environment. Imagine your VMware Cloud environment running your production workloads. I can replicate that into a customer's data centers that is also similarly running a VMware environment. So you can kind of see that central management of your virtual workloads. All right, so from Veeam perspective, you are just acting and working on that virtual layer, and obviously the underlying layer of the compute powers are all within your own data center hardware resources, as well as the VMware Cloud on AWS. All right, pushing it across, kind of treating your production site to be AWS, VMware on AWS, whereby your data centers become the disaster recovery site. In a way, kind of there are customers who are kind of looking at that. Obviously, it does work the other way around, which is kind of when customers who are embarking in that journey into the cloud environment, your customer environment will be the production. Obviously, right now, the VMware environment running your production, taking VMware Cloud on AWS as your disaster recovery site. All right, so I can replicate all the data into the VMware Cloud on AWS. And when a failure occurs on the production site, customer data center, you'll be able to do, again, that failover that I spoke about, powering on the virtual machines and get it up and running. To an extent, you can even do disaster recovery testing. I know sometimes we got to do yearly or even half-yearly disaster recovery testing. Documentation of your disaster recovery testing, or what we call Veeam Availability Orchestrator, orchestrating the DR process, documenting the DR process. That can also be done in these scenarios of the VM replicas, simulating a disaster recovery. Obviously, the previous use cases of production environment in VMware and a customer data center as a DR center, you can also do that orchestration of your disaster recovery, all right? Testing, DR, and so on. So, that is kind of bridging your on-prem workloads that you have in a hybrid cloud environment. What about backing up native, born in the cloud or born in AWS kind of instances, the EC2 instances? So we use the agents. So most of the time, or probably all the time, most of the time or high percentage of the time, you'll be running a Linux or Windows kind of platform in the AWS cloud environment natively. And how we're going to protect that? It'll be through our Veeam agents for Windows. So we do have agents for Windows. You just have to plug in or install the agents in the workloads that you have, all right? And the key thing is not about plugging in the agents, right? The key thing is also not about backing up, right? It's more on what sort of recovery and what sort of consistent backup that we are providing over there. So there are many capabilities over here that allows you to have application aware, if it's a database backup, to have file indexing, to have instant recovery, as well as integration into the overall Veeam backup solution. Basically, the central management of the Veeam backup will still be there, all right? Incremental mode of backup, full backup, all those policies will still be inbuilt with that agents for Windows coming in. So a very simple solution with just the agents inside there, inside your workloads, and you're able to do that protection. All right, and just a screenshots over here on the Explorer. So as I mentioned, recovery is always the main concern when it comes to backup and recovery, right? Backup, it has to be given that the vendors will be providing the backup for you. Recovery is a key point. If you look at this Explorer, it's just one of the Explorer, and we do have the whole list of Explorer like AD, Exchange, SharePoint that allows you to do recovery at the object level of a particular AD objects, a particular user, or even a particular attributes of the user, the email attributes of the particular user, just restoring that granularity, as well as email, SharePoint on a list or libraries, subsites, as well as the documents in SharePoint, right? So SQL databases and individual database for recovery and so on, Oracle databases, and even right at the bottom you can see even other applications. So if you have your own inbuilt application and so on, our tools will be able to help, or what we call a universal explorer, into granular recovery of your application. All right? And next agents will be on Linux environment. As we spoke about, there's Windows, there's as well as Linux workloads. Similarly, deploying an agents onto your Linux environment, which is fully supporting. That's providing that entire virtual workloads backup or entire computer backups through a change block tracking kind of incremental mode. All right, so only changes get backup to make your backup a lot more faster. Supporting for multiple concurrent jobs so that your backup windows can be reduced accordingly. If there's application awareness or database consistency that's required, the inbuilt of pre and post script to be running through the agents to allow you to have a consistent database when you're backing up. Obviously, consistency of a backup does relate into the recovery capabilities. Okay, so if you're into command line, if you're into scripting, you can also script that with full integration, full functional scripting capabilities, all centrally managed into the Veeam backup and replication server that I spoke about. So that kind of main backup service where all the agents will be reporting and getting the data done across. All right, so we spoke about the two use cases of how I can get disaster recovery site in the AWS, or I can kind of switch that. My production site become the disaster recovery site, whereby my AWS, my local site become DR site, my AWS become the production site. So it doesn't matter because the VMware Cloud Foundation suite is there to normalize all the management site. All right, as well as if you are born in the cloud workloads, we have our Linux or our agent-based solution to be able to protect. And it all goes into that same central repository and so on. So next we talk about cloud data retention. So earlier on, we spoke about how do I store that ever-increasing data on your production site. More than 50%, it can be more than 80%, and predicted to have 135 zettabyte of data in year 2025. So we know our data is growing. So there's always a challenge in the data growth when it comes to protection too. As well as it's coupled with a very strong and strict regulation that you need to store this data in a longer period of time. 3 years, 7 years, or even more than 7 years, sometimes a lifetime. So storing the data has a strict compliance. We got to find how we can economically store the data, the huge amount of data, at the more appropriate, cost-effective manner. And that's where the cloud data retention comes into the picture. Okay, so a couple of statistics to show. This is from ESG, whereby customers, through a survey, through the customers or IT decision makers, customers list the mandate of reducing their hardware storage costs. Obviously, right? I mean, these are storing, archiving data, which is needed. And it's most needed whenever you need to do a recovery, right? Or even from compliance standpoint, even without the recovery to be done, you will still need to do that to show your compliance and audit perspective. And 47, I believe that is kind of considered on the lower side. It should be a lot more. That cloud has the most cost-effective backup media. Where is that challenge over here? Some of our customers or quite a lot of organizations will still be thinking about why do I use, I still want to use tape media as a form of protection, long-term archiving, which tape media, yes, long history of putting data into the tape media, manageability, operation side, does have certain advantages and disadvantages as compared to the cloud data retention. Yeah, but what we are seeing, there's a strong influence or a strong preference to go into the cloud storage as a form of long-term archiving. So that is kind of what the market is saying. So what can IT do when this falls onto the lap of the IT department, where the stakeholders of the organization is saying that, yep, I have this requirement from compliance to store this data for this number of years. My data is growing. I can stop that. I can do some manageability on that. But from a backup standpoint, tell me a solutions that can lower the storage cost at the same time increasing of the data usage. Tier-based data approach. I think we are familiar with how production data sets are being tiered into storage-based kind of policy, storage policy-based kind of management. the more important and critical data will go into the more expensive and faster disk, as well as it goes down from a different tiering perspective. That also applies into the backup data. Right? So how can we tier the data accordingly? And tiering the data should be simple, easy, with a couple of things. Probably just one key thing to take note of will be, how do you profile the data based on your recovery SLA? Right? So a very simple fact, if I want to do a fast recovery and the expectation of the data to be recovered is the most recent 2 to 3 days, or even the most recent 1 week, the user expectation is I need this data to be in within minutes. Obviously, you need to have some form of data storing it locally in your on-premises. Okay, data that's more than a month, long-term archiving in the cloud storage, right? More than a month, more than years, you pull it from the cloud. Of course, there will be expectation whereby you take a bit more time when it comes to recovery as compared to on-prem. So the tiering has to be in the picture, and the tiering has to be automated. Right? It takes the kind of a manual planning from the administrator perspective to be able to do what we call a cloud tier architecture. So if you look at the storage, it can be backup storage are typically, you can use direct attached storage, you can use a NAS filer or Dedupe appliances, which is pretty common to store all your backup data. All right? And we term this as the performance tier data, your primary backup storage. Put it inside there. If kind of a rule of thumb, 95% of your data or your request by the users is to restore the most recent 2 weeks of data. 95% or more. Put your data in the performance tier for the most recent 2 weeks. That is the length of time that you're storing your data, which most of the time your recovery is pulling from the performance tier, which can provide you the recovery SLA of within minutes to get the data up and running. Okay, because it's all within the on-prem. Okay, moving across the longer term, older backup files move into the capacity tier. That's where the AWS S3 object storage comes into the picture. All right, and we do it differently. We do it from a general term of hierarchical storage management perspective, or HSM. The metadata files will still be residing in the performance tier. You will still see that files over there, but it's just a stub file or meta link file whereby most of your key data, not key data, most of the bulk of data is already transferred into the capacity tier according to timing, according to age, according to what you need to do, a clone copy immediately. So that is possible. All right. So once it gets into the performance tier, I have a copy out into the capacity tier. And I can have also a policy whereby once it's in for 2 weeks, as mentioned, more than 2 weeks, go into the capacity tier, which will store it there for 3 years, 7 years, and as you like, okay, based on the capacity tier of S3 object storage, which again, the cost will be so much lower. At the same time, easier manageability. Recovery, yes, it's not as fast as performance tier, but I would feel you'll still be faster than tape recovery, right? So this is the kind of metadata, a diagram to kind of depict what I'm saying earlier on. The performance tier storing all your data over there. So as you move along by the age, all right, you'll be seeing metadata, all right, as well as the chunk of data is pushed across. So take, for example, this is a 10 TB backup data in the performance tier. For 2 weeks, I have 10 TB over there. So after, obviously, the 10 TB will still be populated by the most recent 2 weeks. But more than 2 weeks data, you only be keeping metadata, which is probably in less than 20 meg. So 10 TB of data, I'm using like 60 meg of data, but this metadata will be pointing to the data chunk in the S3 object storage. Okay, so that's kind of how that pointer works over there. So from a user experience perspective, no differences. You just have to select a point in time that you want to recover. For example, data which is 3 months old, Veeam will actually look at the data. Is it residing on a capacity tier or in the performance tier? And pull the data accordingly. So from a user experience, maybe a slight timing difference if it's on a performance tier as compared to a capacity tier. Other than that, you will still be that recovery process coming in, and you get your virtual workloads or your file workloads or your file to be recovered. What is important of There's metadata on the performance tier. At the same time, there's metadata that you can see in the capacity tier. We call it a self-contained, a self-sufficient archiving data, which means to say, if this set, hang on, so if my performance tier, due to some reason, got corrupted, got compromised, okay, I lost everything, will I be able to restore the data from that self-contained capacity tier? Obviously, because my data is also up there. So it's self-contained, it's self-sufficient. I can rebuild a new Veeam backup server. I just have to point to this S3 object storage. I'll be able to populate all the data back in and then do the recovery from there. All right? So lowering the space with longer term of data to recover, at the same time, self-contained backup files that's in the capacity tier. All right. So looking at this, it also helps in getting your data into the cloud. So take, for example, right, another use case over here. When it comes to, for example, my performance tier is gone or my production site on-prem is gone, I can always build a Veeam backup service in the AWS environment, point to this capacity tier, and restore my workloads into AWS. As simple as that, a form of migrating production environment into your AWS. And it will be faster because this data, the key core data are already, or the data chunks are already residing in AWS, all right? So it doesn't have to go through that whole internet bandwidth process. So a difference of how we are doing it uniquely. So just list it down over here. Offloaded backup files, as mentioned, are shells. All right, there's a local cache area to make sure that the cloud I/O can be rebuilt if it's lost. Self-contained of the backup files. All restore functionalities work. As mentioned earlier on, user experience remains the same, whether it's backing up on-prem data, whether it's backing up data or recovery of data into the cloud. So entire files, a particular file, a particular item, the whole virtual machine recovery, and intelligent block recovery. So this is kind of important. We talk about the egress, right? So as much as from a cost savings perspective, if I'm pulling data from the AWS Cloud, it will incur costs because of the egress cost, right? So what we'll do over here is that we will always compare what is in the performance tier, which is on-prem, and what is in the capacity tier. We will pull on the relevant node of the data. If I can get the data from the on-prem data storage, I'll get the data over there without pulling it from AWS. So we will intelligently combine and make sure that only when data is missing in your local storage, I'll pull it from the AWS S3 object storage. Right? So that's the uniqueness. Again, this is all at the back end, doing it for you from a Veeam kind of internal engine processing perspective. All right? Again, reducing the cost is the main thing, right? So from Veeam perspective, we do not charge that particular cloud tax, on kind of call it a cloud tax. So what you need to pay for, obviously, the S3 object storage that you're subscribing to. From Veeam perspective, it's just another capabilities to be turned on, all right? With infrastructure setup, I can put all your data into the S3 object storage. There's no extra charging of what you're backing up on-prem. You're going to back up another 10 TB into the object storage. On top of paying the object storage that you're subscribing for AWS, Veeam got to charge you again for the 10 TB of additional archiving. No, we don't do that. So there's no double charging in that sense. That will help you reduce the cost tremendously. Next is always on a hardware transparency of what we are doing over here. We talk about cloud mobility, to a certain extent cloud agnostic. All right, so no vendor lock-in. We don't hold your data. The data can be restored to any choice that you want. Veeam license is required. No Veeam license is required because as long as the data, we don't stop you from recovering. Right? Even though you might not have the subscription with Veeam anymore, you'll still be able to recover your data as long as the backup image is still intact over there, whether be it on-prem or it's in the cloud environment. All right, so kind of last case over here, cloud mobility is critical, cloud agnostic as mentioned, three critical use cases: mobility, data recovery, test and lab environment, which is a very typical use case when moving into the cloud. All right, so a couple of things from what the market says. This is from ESG again. All right, expectation of backups to be in the cloud, 23% or more than 23% next year to come. IT leaders are concerned whereby workloads are not as portable. Do I get locked in when I push into the cloud? So cloud mobility, listing down, direct restore to AWS, portable of your data moving from on-prem into the cloud seamlessly, two-step process, which makes it wizard-driven. To add on top of that, recovery of workloads for business continuity perspective, kind of getting it permanently running in AWS. Unlock your test and development environment using the abundance of resources and compute power on demand in the cloud environment instead of making use of your local resources in that context. All right, so the Veeam Cloud Mobility use cases and technology and capabilities provide this simple way of running things. So kind of a product listing over here, backup, direct restore to AWS, a bit of migration, at the same time, planned migration into the Amazon EC2 through agents, through Windows and Linux environment. All right, technical benefits, I won't go through all the list of things over here. So again, simplicity from wizard standpoint, converting on the fly into a AWS friendly instance, moving into any of your AWS EC2 disk type. You can choose what type to use, what profile, estimated costing, conversion, secure restore, scanning, as well as a secure perspective from a restoration standpoint into EC2. So these are some of the benefits, not just limited to this, but a lot more benefits. Obviously, use cases, we do have more than use cases, we do have customer success cases. You can go to Veeam Customer Success. You can take a look at some of the commons and joint customers that we have together with AWS. All right? So, yep. Thank you very much for your time. I'm slightly off on 5 seconds, but yep, do remember, rewarding to all of you guys who stay through the session. I've forgotten to give in the password, but I'll give it at one go right now. So the password is Cloud Mobility. All right? Cloud Mobility. So write it down over here in Cloud Mobility. Visit our booth. You won't miss our booth, and you'll get a token of appreciation from our side. All right? So thank you very much. Appreciate the time and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Again, please complete the survey in the app, and you can use that to redeem a free AWS branded swag item at the info counter. If you would like the content right now, you can scan your badge with these lovely content team up front. And we will have a short afternoon tea break right now. The next session in this room will be Enterprise Network Architectures on AWS, starting at 3:30. Thank you.